You walk down into the cellar in November to fetch a jar of last summer's tomatoes, and you stop at the bottom of the steps. The air down here is cool, smelling faintly of damp earth and scrubbed limestone. The shelves are full, jars of green beans put up in August, crocks of sauerkraut working through its second month, a heavy stone keeping the cabbage submerged in its own brine, sacks of potatoes and onions in the wooden bins, cured hams hanging from the rafter, wrapped in cheesecloth, the lime water bucket of eggs sitting in the cool corner, and along the far wall, the deeper pantry, the long shelves of dry food in 5-gallon buckets and clean glass jars. The food that does not spoil, because the food was never meant to spoil. The salt that has not aged a day since the day it was mined. The honey that would still be edible if your great-great-grandchildren found it on the shelf 100 years from now. The rice in the sealed bucket that will be safe to eat in 25 years. Every week, the modern grocery store sells you food with a best buy date stamped on the side that tells you to throw it out in 6 months, a year, 2 years, at the longest. And the grocery store is not telling you a lie. The cheap factory canned food with the soft cans, the thin paper labels, and the modern shelf life additives really does have a finite life. The metal rusts from the inside out. The preservatives break down into bitter chemicals. People pay hundreds of dollars a year replacing these short-lived convenience foods, constantly tossing out expired cans and stale boxes. It is an expensive, never-ending cycle of waste. Stop and think about that. How did folks live before that cycle existed? Understand this. The food that has been kept by careful folks for centuries, the salt, the sugar, the honey, the wheat, the dried beans, and the rice, that food does not expire. It outlasts the family that stored it. It outlasts the wooden cellar shelves it sits on. Some of it has been found edible after 3,000 years in the dry stone tombs of Egypt. That is not a story I am making up. That is recorded history, verified by modern research laboratories that have opened those ancient vessels and found the contents free from bacteria and completely safe for consumption. My name is Elias Yodar. I am Amish, and I farm the gray-brown soil here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My wife Esther and I keep a deep pantry the way our parents and grandparents kept a deep pantry. Every careful farm family in this country kept a deep pantry before grocery stores became the kitchen extension that most folks now live by. The deep pantry is the difference between a family that eats whether the weather, the winter roads, the diesel trucks, or the supply chains hold up, and a family that does not. Today, I am going to walk you through 13 foods that, when properly stored, never expire. Some of them you already know: salt, sugar, honey, rice, beans. Some of them you may not have thought about as long storage items, like apple cider vinegar, wheat berries, and dried whole corn. All 13 of them are real. All 13 are tested by generations of farm families who knew what it meant to face a long winter with nothing but what was inside their stone walls. Best of all 13 are within reach of any family that wants to start a deep pantry without spending much money or learning anything complicated. These are the foundation foods, the ones that have been keeping families alive between harvests for 10,000 years. Before we look at the buckets, let me say an honest word about the limitations of this method. This is not a magic trick. Long storage food will not stay good if you simply chuck a paper sack of grain onto a damp basement floor and walk away. Nature has rules, and if you break them, the dampness will rot your grain, or the weevils will turn it to dust within a single season. This method only works for specific, whole foods, and it demands 3 things from you: cleanliness, dryness, and darkness. If you cannot give the food those 3 things, do not waste your money buying it in bulk. But if you can honor those simple boundaries, the food will honor you back by staying exactly as nutritious 30 years from now as it is today. Let us start with the 3 pantry kings: salt, sugar, and honey. I treat these 3 together because they share the same fundamental property. They are so chemically stable that none of them will ever spoil if kept dry. Salt is sodium chloride, a pure mineral. The salt that was mined from the earth 50 years ago and the salt being mined today are chemically identical, and both are exactly as good as the salt the Roman soldiers put on their meat in the year 50 after Christ. Salt does not break down. Stored in a dry container, a glass jar, a sealed bucket, even just the original cardboard box kept away from damp walls. A bag of plain table salt will be fine for your grandchildren. The only enemy of salt is moisture, which causes it to clump and harden into a gray crust. Hardened salt is still good salt. You simply break up the clumps with a wooden mallet and use it. A 50-pound bag of plain salt at the local feed store runs about $10 or $12, and it is enough to preserve food and seasoned meals for a family for many years. Sugar is sucrose. It is a more complex molecule than salt, but it is extremely stable in its dry crystalline form. Like salt, sugar may harden over time as it absorbs trace moisture from the air, turning into a white block as hard as sandstone. But hardened sugar is still good sugar. You break it up and it dissolves just the same. There is one important note here, a mistake I see many modern folks make when they first try to store sugar. Do not use oxygen absorbers with sugar. The absorber will pull the ambient moisture right out of the crystals and turn your bucket of sugar into a solid brick that you cannot break apart without a cold chisel and a hammer. Sugar wants nothing but a clean, dry, sealed container. A plain glass jar or a food-grade plastic bucket with a tight lid is all it needs. Then there is honey, the oldest documented preserved food on Earth. The chemistry behind it is plain, though it feels like a miracle when you look at it. Raw honey is so low in water content, under 18%, and so naturally acidic that bacteria and fungi simply cannot multiply in it. It suffocates them on a microscopic level. Now, honey will crystallize over the years. It turns from a clear golden liquid into a thick, opaque, grainy paste. I see folks throw it away in the trash, thinking it has gone bad. It hasn't. The changing texture is just the natural sugars separating from the trace water. You simply set the jar in a pan of warm water on the stove for 10 minutes, and those rough crystals dissolve back into smooth, liquid gold. It is the same honey, from the same bees, still good. These three are your foundation. But a family cannot live on salt, sugar, and honey alone. You need protein, and you need starch to sustain hard work through the winter months. And that brings us to the dry goods that build the muscle of the deep pantry. White rice, dried beans, and whole grains. But there is a specific way these must be prepared before they ever touch the shelf. A traditional sealing process that determines whether your rice lasts 25 years or turns rancid in 25 months. I have the buckets sitting right here on the workshop bench, along with the old tools Esther and I use to lock out the air. Let me show you exactly how we prepare the containers so that the moisture stays out, the pests stay away, and the food stays alive. Look here on the workshop bench. What you see before you looks modern, but the principle behind it is as old as the earth. We have a clean white 5-gallon plastic bucket, a thick silver mylar bag that crinkles like heavy foil when you touch it, a scrap piece of 2x4 lumber, and Esther's regular household clothes iron plugged into the wall. This is what modern folks call the mylar and bucket method. We are going to build a fortress around 30 pounds of long-grain white rice, and I am going to show you how to do it so that not a single grain spoils between now and the day your grandchildren are grown. Let us start with the bucket itself, because this is where the first mistake happens. Many beginners will grab any 5-gallon bucket they find behind the barn or at the local construction site. Stop and think about that. If that bucket once held commercial laundry soap, industrial paint, or dill pickles, you will never get that scent out of the plastic. Plastic breathes, you see. Over 20 years, the chemical smell of that old soap or the sour tang of those pickles will leach right through your storage bag and turn your rice into something that smells like a wash house. Look at the bottom of the bucket. You want to see a small recycling triangle with the number 2 stamped inside it. and the letters HDPE. That stands for high-density polyethylene, which means it is food grade, completely inert, and will not pass any foul chemicals into your food. Wash it with hot water, rinse it until there is no scent left but clean plastic, and let it sit in the sun until it is bone dry. Now, take this silver Mylar bag. This is not a regular grocery sack. It is a multi-layered sheet of aluminum foil laminated between layers of tough plastic. A plain plastic bucket will let microscopic amounts of oxygen pass through its walls over a decade. This silver lining is the actual wall that stops the air completely. Slide the empty bag down into the clean bucket, flattening the bottom with your hands so it sits square. Next comes the grain. Today we are putting up long-grain white rice. Look at the color. It should be a clean, translucent white, free of dark specks or yellow tint. When you open the commercial sack, it should smell like nothing but dry earth and straw. Listen to this sound as I tip the sack into the bucket. It is a sharp, clean clatter, like a sudden April hailstorm hitting a tin roof, as thousands of grains slide down into the silver bag. Fill it up, but do not fill it to the very brim. Leave about 3 or 4 inches of silver rim showing at the top. This is your headspace, and you need it so you can seal the bag shut without spilling a single grain. Give the bucket a gentle shake side to side. You will hear the rice settle into place, the grains sliding against one another until the surface is flat and level as a pond. Understand this next part clearly, because it is where most folks ruin their hard work. We are going to use an oxygen absorber. This is a small, soft paper packet filled with nothing but fine iron powder and a little salt. When it comes into contact with the air, that iron powder begins to rust, and as it rusts, it drinks up the oxygen inside the sealed bag until there is none left. But here is the danger. The moment you open the sealed package of absorbers from the store, they start drinking air immediately. If you fumble around, looking for your scissors, or talking to your neighbor, those little packets will fill themselves up with air right there on your bench. Within 15 minutes, the iron turns to useless gray crust, and they are completely dead before they ever touch your food. When you are ready to seal, leave your absorbers in their sealed glass jar until the very last second. Have your clothes iron hot, set to the wool or cotton setting. High heat but no steam. Ensure there is no water left in the iron's reservoir, because steam is the mortal enemy of dry grain. Lay your scrap piece of 2x4 wood right across the top rim of the bucket. Pull the silver edges of the Mylar bag up and drape them flat across that wooden board. This board gives you a hard, level surface to press against. Now, pull one single oxygen absorber from your jar, drop it right on top of the rice, and move quickly. Pull the 2 silver edges of the bag together across the board so they are smooth, with no wrinkles. Take the hot iron and press it firmly against one corner of the silver plastic, sliding it slowly across the wood. Watch closely as the plastic passes under the iron. You will see the silver material change slightly. It darkens and takes on a smooth, melted sheen as the layers weld themselves together. You will smell a faint, sweet scent of warm laminate, like a hot iron on a starched shirt. Do not seal the bag completely across on the first pass. Leave a small 2-inch gap open at the far corner. Take your hands and gently press down on the middle of the silver bag, squeezing the bulk of the trapped air out through that little opening. You will hear a soft hiss of escaping air. While keeping that pressure down with one hand, take the iron with the other and slide it over that final 2-inch corner, closing the gate completely. Inspect your weld. It should be a solid, flat ribbon of silver, at least 1 inch wide, with no pinholes or puckers where air could sneak back in. Take the excess silver flap, fold it down neatly inside the bucket, and then take your heavy plastic lid. Set it on top and use a wooden mallet or the heel of your hand to strike the edges. Thud, thud, thud. Listen for that sharp snap that tells you the lid is locked against the rubber gasket. Write the date and the contents on the lid with a black marker. Now, go away and leave it alone for 2 days. When you come back and pop the plastic lid off to check your work, you might expect the silver bag to be pulled down as tight as a brick, like those vacuum-packed coffees at the store. If it isn't, do not panic, and do not throw the bag away thinking it failed. Remember your schoolbook learning. The air we breathe is only 21% oxygen. The rest is mostly nitrogen. The little packet inside did its job. It drank every drop of that 21% oxygen, leaving the 78% nitrogen behind. Nitrogen is an inert gas. It will not let bugs hatch, it will not let mold grow, and it will not let the oils turn sour. The bag will look slightly dimpled and shrunk, like a coat that is a size too large. But inside, the atmosphere is dead and safe. That is the entire mystery of the method. It takes less than 5 minutes once your tools are laid out, and it costs less than $2 per bucket, above the price of the grain itself. But before you carry this bucket down the steps into the dark, you must understand how to care for it over the long years, because the storage room itself is the final piece of the lock. Let us carry this down to the root cellar, and I will show you how the temperature of the air changes the life of the seed. Set the bucket down here on the gravel floor of the cellar. Feel that shift in the air. The temperature down here sits at 55 degrees, summer or winter. It feels heavy, steady, and still. This is where the work we did upstairs on the bench meets the deep laws of nature. Many folks look at a silver bag and a plastic bucket and think it is just a modern trick, a bit of clever engineering from a factory. But understand this, all we have done is create a small, artificial winter inside that bag. A place where time itself is forced to slow down to a crawl. Let us shine a lantern on the actual science of why this works. Using simple truths we can see with our own eyes in the orchard and the fields. Food spoils for 2 reasons, and only 2. Living things that want to eat it before you do, and the invisible chemical burning caused by the air itself. First, consider the living things. When you buy a sack of grain or beans from a mill, it looks clean, but nature is thorough. Microscopic insect eggs, what folks call weevils, are already sitting inside those grains, laid there while the wheat was still standing green in the sun. If you leave that sack in a warm, airy kitchen pantry, those eggs will hatch. Within a few months, you open the lid and find a crawling gray mass of bugs, turning your flour into bitter dust. But those insects are just like you and me. They must breathe to live. By dropping that iron powder packet into the mylar bag and sealing it tight, we starve them of oxygen. The eggs cannot hatch, the larvae cannot grow, and the microscopic molds that cause rot are smothered before they can spin a single thread of fuzz. They are locked in a permanent sleep. The second enemy is harder to see, but it is far more persistent. It is a process scientists call oxidation. But you can think of it simply as a slow, invisible fire. Stop and think about what happens when you cut an apple in half and leave it on the kitchen table. Within 10 minutes, the white flesh turns a dull, rusty brown. That is oxygen eating away at the fruit, breaking down its cells and stealing its nutrients. The very same thing happens to dry grain, only it takes years instead of minutes. Oxygen attacks the delicate vitamins and the natural starches, slowly turning them stale, flat, and sour. When we seal that mylar bag, the iron powder inside the absorber undergoes its own form of oxidation. It rusts. It drinks up the floating oxygen so greedily that it leaves nothing behind for the food. The iron packet sacrifices itself, burning up the air so your grain doesn't have to. What remains inside the bag is almost pure nitrogen gas. Nitrogen is a friendly, quiet neighbor. It doesn't react with anything. It just sits there, cushioning the grain, keeping it dry, and preventing that slow chemical fire from ever striking a match. Now, let us talk about temperature, because the room you put this bucket in is just as important as the seal itself. Think of chemical reactions like a country dance. When the music is fast and the room is hot, everyone moves quickly, bumping into each other and stirring up dust. In an 80-degree attic, the molecules inside your food are dancing a frantic jig, breaking down twice as fast as they would in a 70-degree room. But when you bring the temperature down into a cool cellar like this one, the music slows down to a low, dragging hum. The molecules almost stop moving. Every 10 degrees you drop the temperature doubles the lifespan of your storage. That is why a bucket of rice that might last 15 years in a hot suburban garage will easily last 30 years down here in the cool earth. But here is the honest limit. The boundary line where this method stops working and becomes downright dangerous. This is the part where I must speak plainly, because a mistake here will not just waste your money. It can make your family grievously sick. Understand this rule above all others. The Mylar and bucket method is strictly for dry foods. The moisture content of whatever you put inside that bag must be below 10 or 12%. If you try to use this method on wet foods, or even foods that feel just a little bit damp or chewy, you are building a trap. There is an invisible soil bacteria called Clostridium botulinum, the organism that causes botulism. It is a peculiar creature because it cannot grow where there is fresh air. Oxygen actually keeps it asleep. But when you take a food that has moisture, like home-dried raisins, soft jerky that isn't fully brittle, or whole grains that were harvested during a rainy week and never properly cured, and you seal them inside a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber, you have created the absolute perfect home for botulism. You have given it darkness, moisture, and a completely airless space. The bacteria will awake, multiply, and produce a toxin that is a deadly poison, all without changing the look or the smell of the food. So, let us draw the line clearly. What fails in long-term bucket storage? Soft dried fruits like prunes and raisins, chewy meats, brown sugar which needs its moisture to stay soft, whole nuts like walnuts or pecans, which carry too much water and natural oil. Fats are another boundary line you cannot cross. Think of lard left out on a warm counter. Within a few weeks, it takes on a sharp, stinging smell that tells you it has gone rancid. Brown rice is a common trap for beginners. It looks healthier than white rice, and folks want to store it by the hundredweight. But brown rice still has its outer jacket on, the bran and the germ. That jacket is full of natural, delicate oils. Even if you take away the oxygen, those internal oils will break down over 5 years from their own native enzymes, turning the rice bitter and soapy. White rice has had that oily coat milled away, leaving nothing but the hard, dry starch. That is why white rice can sleep for 30 years while brown rice wakes up spoiled in 3. The same is true for whole grains versus flour. A kernel of wheat, the wheat berry, is like a tiny wooden egg. Its outer shell is a perfect natural armor that seals the oils inside the germ away from the world. You can store that whole berry in a bucket for a quarter of a century, and it will still grind into sweet, fresh flour. But if you grind that wheat into whole wheat flour first, you smash that armor. You expose all those delicate oils to the elements. Even in Mylar, that flour will begin to degrade within 5 to 10 years. Store the seed, not the flour. That is the old law of the granary. We have looked at the cellar. We have looked at the tools, and now you understand the invisible laws of air and heat that keep the deep pantry alive. But knowing the science is only half the battle. The true test comes when the snow is drifting against the kitchen windows in January, and you must actually live out of these buckets. Next time, I am going to show you how Esther and I take these dry, ancient staples from the dark shelves and turn them into hot, filling meals using nothing but a cast iron pot and the residual heat of a wood-burning stove. Let us sit here on this low wooden bench for a moment, near the far wall, where the white buckets are stacked 3 high in the shadows. Look at them sitting there, silent and clean against the limestone. The silver bag we sealed upstairs on the bench is a modern thing, certainly, but the truth it holds is as old as the soil beneath our boots. We have simply taken an ancient law of survival and wrapped it in a piece of modern plastic. The old folks did not have polymer sheets or iron powder packets, but they understood the exact same principles because they watched how nature worked. Go back into the histories, and you will find that every great civilization that survived a dark age did so because they mastered the art of the dry granary. In ancient Egypt, during the times the old books tell us about the 7 lean years, the pharaoh's grain-keepers built vast underground silos dug deep into the scorched, dry desert sand. They lined the pits with straw and sealed the top with heavy clay plaster to bake under the sun. By sealing those underground rooms completely, the breathing of the grain itself used up the remaining oxygen, suffocating the pests and keeping the wheat sweet and edible for over a decade. When modern archaeologists opened those stone tombs and storage pits thousands of years later, they found barley grains that were still recognizable, free from rot and chemically intact, our own ancestors. When they crossed the dark Atlantic Ocean in the 1700s to find a new home in Pennsylvania, brought their lives packed inside heavy oak barrels. To keep their precious dried peas, flour, and seed corn from spoiling during the damp months at sea, they would pack the food tightly. Then drop a piece of burning brimstone, what folks now call sulfur, or a hot piece of hardwood charcoal into the top of the barrel just before driving the wooden bung into the hole with a mallet. The fire would consume the oxygen inside the tight barrel and go out on its own, leaving an airless space where the salt water and the damp ocean air could not ruin the harvest of the past year. They didn't know the word oxidation, but they knew that fire drank the air and that without air, the food slept safely. Now, if you are a person who lives in the modern world and needs more than the testimony of an old farm family to believe this, understand this: modern science has spent decades testing these traditional ways, and the official records are completely open for anyone to read. Over the last 25 years, researchers at Brigham Young University, inside their Department of Nutrition, Dietetics, and Food Science, began a massive study on old food storage. They didn't buy fresh food from the store. Instead, they went out into the community and collected real buckets of white rice, pinto beans, and whole wheat that had been packed by everyday families and left sitting in ordinary, cool household basements for 20, 25, and even 30 years. The scientists opened those decades-old containers in their laboratories, analyzed the chemistry of the grains, and fed them to testing panels. The data they published in their official nutritional bulletins was clear as spring water. They found that white rice stored in low-oxygen environments for 30 years retained its nutritional value, its caloric strength, and its essential amino acids. When they cooked that 30-year-old rice, over 80% of the taste testers rated it as completely acceptable for everyday family meals. They found the same results with whole wheat berries and dried pinto beans. Though the old beans required a longer soak in a pot of water to soften their ancient skins, the protein inside had not degraded by a single percentage point. The university extension offices across the western states have quietly published these circulars for a generation, proving with microscopes and chemical assays what the old folks always knew by simple experience. If you keep the moisture out and starve the air, you stop the clock entirely. Stop and think about the quiet confidence that knowledge brings to a home. We live in a time where folks have grown used to living from hand to mouth, relying on a fragile chain of trucks, roads, and digital scanners to bring them their daily bread every Tuesday and Friday. If the power blinks or the winter snow closes the mountain passes for 3 days, the store shelves turn as bare as a winter barn. That is a heavy, anxious way for a family to live. It makes you a servant to things you cannot control. But building a deep pantry is the cure for that anxiety, and it does not require you to be a wealthy man. Nor does it ask you to move to a farm or change your way of dress. It is a path open to anyone with a spare closet, a cool corner under the stairs, or a clean space against a basement wall. You do not have to spend thousands of dollars all at once. That is a beginner's mistake that leads to a messy pantry and a discouraged heart. Start with what is simple. This very week, when you go to town, do not buy the expensive, fancy survival kits packed in shiny cans with the colorful labels that promise to last forever but cost a week's wages. Instead, buy one single 20-pound bag of plain white rice for $15. Buy one food-grade bucket and one silver bag. Come home, clear off your kitchen table, and seal that one bucket the way I showed you today. Feel the weight of it in your hands as you carry it to its resting place. That one bucket represents 30 pounds of clean, safe food that will sit quietly in the dark, waiting for a day 20 or 30 years from now when your family might need it. When that bucket is on the shelf, you have taken your first step out of the fragile line. Next month, do the same with a bag of dried pinto beans. The month after that, put up a bucket of rolled oats. Before the year turns over, you will look at your shelves and see a fortress of grain and protein. Thousands of stable, nutritious meals built dollar by dollar, bucket by bucket. It is a quiet, dignified way of living. It is the way that honors the seasons, respects the old knowledge, and protects the people you love from whatever storms the winter may bring. The tools are on your bench, the grains are in the sacks, and the old path is right there before your feet. All that is left for you to do is to take the first step, pick up the iron, and seal the bag. That is how our people have always done it, and that is how the careful ones will continue to do it for generations to come.